All right, today this lecture is on nativism. I know we already brought this up in a previous lecture, but I wanted to go over this again, at least in terms of definition, a couple of examples and political cartoons that I'll show you. So again, nativism is when people that are born in America to protect native-born interests. So people that are born in America are worried about their interests and protecting their rights. And they're anti-immigrant, they're anti-Catholic, they're against African Americans. Basically, anybody that's not from here, they're against. Plain out and simple. Um, they don't like a lot of the new things that are going on and how America's changing during this time, as we mentioned before. Again, America at this time was a melting pot. You're taking German Americans, Italian Americans, Eastern Europeans, Northwestern Europeans. We're kind of forming our own identity, and you're blending different cultures together and foods, holidays, etc. Um, a lot of the natives didn't like the direction that America was heading in. They didn't like the change. They didn't like that Americans or some of the immigrants couldn't speak English and weren't adapting to U.S. lifestyles and culture. So now why? Again, many of them were scabs. And remember what scabs are? Scabs are people that are immigrants, typically that went against the strikes. They crossed the picket lines. They hurt unions. So immigrants got a bad connotation with that as being anti-union, as being strike breakers. So that's one. Two, taking jobs away or from Americans. I showed you guys a slide again in a previous lecture on how many Americans felt like that immigrants were taking jobs away from native-born Americans. And then three, stereotypes for immigrants. There were stereotypes that they were criminals, they were not educated, they were unskilled, they carried diseases with them. They did not build our country. They didn't fight in the American Revolutionary War. All right, sorry about that. I had a little interruption. My kids were yelling for me. I apologize. So again, stereotypes for immigrants that they will not adapt to U.S. culture. They wanted to speak their own language, do their own things, do their own traditions. So that's why a lot of natives were upset about that. Stereotypes they carry disease with them. They were not educated. Um, they were criminals. And again, the fact that they did not build our country. They didn't fight in the American Revolutionary War. They didn't gain all the freedoms and things that our forefathers fought for. So you see this political cartoon here. It's a prime example. Here's U.S. border. You have an immigrant right here. He's undesirable as stated, and he's walking into the country with obviously a bomb on his head, basically meaning that he's going to blow up our culture. Not figuratively kill anybody. That's not what I'm saying. But according to this cartoon, is that they're going to change our culture. They're going to change the way America's operating, the way it runs. So again, you have tons of political cartoons just like this, as I'll show you here in a little bit. Then you have again other things in terms of African Americans. All right, sorry again, disruption. So African Americans as well are going to have difficult times during this time as well, not just immigrants, but African Americans. A couple court cases. I would highlight this in your notes, guys. This is something that you're going to be learning about in government. I'll bring it up again when we get to our civil rights unit. But Plessy versus Ferguson is an extremely important court case. Again, I have to highlight this. This is a court case, Supreme Court. They found that, basically, long story short, you had somebody who was an African American male rode a train car in Louisiana. He was mixed white and black. And in the South at that time, Louisiana, they had segregation laws. Excuse me, where African Americans weren't allowed to sit in the white section of these railroad cars. And he sat in the white section, and he was removed from that section. He couldn't sit there because he was part black. So he challenged the Louisiana state law, saying that segregation is not fair. A long story short, goes to Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled in favor that segregation is legal. That Louisiana law is okay. It is legal to do that. So this court case was important because it said that separate is equal. That you were allowed to separate based upon race. So for the next 60 years in U.S. history, we have something called Jim Crow laws, where in the South, Alabama, all those southern states, the Carolinas, Georgia, Mississippi, where blacks were separated from whites. So they had separate African American schools, separate water fountains, separate bathrooms. If you've seen the movie 42 before, or the movie about Jackie Robinson, there's definitely some examples of Jim Crow in there. If you've seen Remember the Titans, the football movie, there's examples of Jim Crow examples in there as well. But those are legalized separation of the races. And also voting restrictions in the South where African Americans were restricted. African Americans weren't allowed to vote, or if they were restricted in the fact they had to pass these tests in order to vote. And these literacy tests were reading and writing tests, and they would often give African Americans the harder tests than whites. Um, so that was a major issue. Women also during this time could not vote yet. So again, the only people who could vote in the United States was, white males. So you're seeing there's not really a whole lot of representation amongst women and minorities in power positions, those that make laws and rules for our country. So obviously, major problem. Oh, there we go. All right, so the new immigrants, as I stated before, these immigrants from the natives. So you started seeing this kind of creep up a little bit in national policy and laws. So in 1882, the federal government passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, meaning that they prohibited Chinese laborers from entering the country. This was not lifted until 1943. So again, if you do the math, for about 60 years, this law was in place where we forbid any Chinese laborers from coming to our country. A lot of this was dealt to like the Transcontinental Railroad when it was built, going from east to west in the United States. A lot of natives were upset that Chinese laborers were coming in and taking native jobs. And obviously, some of this had to do with some racist undertones as well. The Chinese and Asian cultures, in terms of different from European, they spoke differently, different religions than Europeans. So there were a lot more racist undertones, especially for Chinese or other Asian cultures during this time. And then you have, again, giving an example, in Japan, there's something called the Gentleman's Agreement in 1907. The federal government passed an agreement between U.S. and Japan, in which Japan agreed to restrict immigration to the United States. So again, another Asian country with Japan restricting immigration, not really welcomed in our country. Um, so you see some, like, again, very very racist um, political cartoons that were published in newspapers during this time. Obviously, this would not fly today. So you see here this tree and it says veto, and so basically veto them from the country, get them out. But again, you know, a lot of immigrant groups had a difficult time. The Irish, and I'll show you guys here in a minute, had a very tough time. The Italians, but arguably the Asians. This is, in terms of different Asian countries. Again, their cultures were very different even from Europeans. So you see this in national law being passed. So there were obviously natives in the national government that wanted to restrict immigration as well. All right, so you can go skip this for now. But the immigration quotas. So in 1890, the federal government passed quota laws that limited the amount of immigrants allowed coming from different countries around the world. They were only allowed 2% of the census. So I'm not going to go into detail on that, but ultimately the main gist of it is that they restricted immigration, especially from Southern and Eastern Europe, as well as different Asian countries as well. So this was the quota laws that were passed. So you see this, again, cartoon, Europe, it's like a cylinder. So a lot of people that are in a cylinder, but only a few are allowed in. So that's kind of the cartoon showcasing those quota laws. So you see this right here is it's a picture. So this black right here is from Germany. So they were allowed over 50,000 immigrants coming from Germany to the United States. So that was desirable. Why? Well, they were white. They were Protestant. They fit, in more, blended in more to American culture. Then you see these ones with the little black stripes here are also allowed 30 to 50,000. That's, obviously you have France. Oh, I'm sorry. Also with Germany, you have Great Britain, Ireland as well in this area. Then you have um, Italy, and you have France, that allowed a good chunk of individuals as well. But notice like Turkey, Middle Eastern country, restricting immigration big time. Spain restricting immigration. Bulgaria restricting immigration. Um, Russia is even restricted. So you see that from countries that do not speak English, you see the immigrations are restricted a lot more than in areas like Great Britain and Ireland and Germany, where English is still a predominant language there. All right, so again, political cartoons put in newspapers. So you see this political cartoon depicting Chinese immigrants, showcasing how they lived. And you see Chinese immigrants worked, lived, and regular American workers lived. Rats, yummy, and how they're eating rats. How they live. They're packed into rooms like sardines. Again, not uh, not portraying life as what America. So here's this how Americans lived. A civil family lived this way. Had their house, had a table, had your dinner, kids playing, and then you had um, you'd have this um, on how Chinese immigrants workers lived. So obviously a big difference there in how these cartoons are being portrayed to the American public. Skip this. Um, Obviously this Coco cartoon again, same thing. Uncle Sam. He's not a real person, but he's a representative of the American government. Here's the Gates, who's immigrant. So notice what it says in the bags: poverty, disease, anarchy. So obviously stereotypes towards immigrants, being impoverished, coming over with poverty, with disease, anarchy, with radical ideas and beliefs. And look at Uncle Sam. He's standing. He's not welcoming him into the country. He's standing in the doorway, blocking him. Look at his nose. He's blocking his nose like he stinks. Being very judgmental. So again, these are cartoons that were in newspapers that portrayed immigrants as being undesirables, and it's propaganda. If you're an average person who doesn't know an immigrant and you're seeing these, you're associating immigrants with these characteristics without really even knowing them. Same thing for here. They're not welcoming immigrants. All right, so here is the Irish and the Chinese. Here's Uncle Sam here. Here's the Irish immigrant. Here's obviously an Asian immigrant, and they're swallowing Uncle Sam. They're basically going to take over. And look, you can see the thing here. But ultimately, they're saying that they're going to eventually take over our country. But also look at how they're portrayed. Like, obviously, very racist undertones. And problem solved. The Irish turns into the Chinese, basically comparing them to them. Um, Same thing here. Uncle Sam kicking out an Asian immigrant. Again, look at how he's drawn. Again, very racist undertones. Now, this is also something very interesting too. Irish. Sorry, my kids up there singing on their thing, so apologize if you hear that. So obviously, as you guys probably are well aware, in the 1800s and for a long time, African Americans had to deal with slavery and Jim Crow and awful conditions. But so look at this: South, the North. So South is African Americans, and North is the Irish. And they're saying they're equal. So in many places, especially in this time period, the Irish were seen as undesirable. They were seen as comparable to African Americans of the South. That was so. Again, things like this would not be allowed to be printed in newspapers today. Again, very very racist, nativist ideals being portrayed to the public. But back then, that's just the time period. All right. So anyway, that is it for today. You'll have an assignment that you should have completed. We're gonna start prepping for our Gilded Age test. All right, guys. Have a good day.